Hello and welcome to this Tungsten Replicator Masterclass training session where we are looking at using the Tungsten Replicator TMI. My name is Chris Parker, VP of Customer Success here at Continuant. In this short course we'll recap and review the sources and targets available with the TMI. We'll talk about what the Replicator TMI is and what it isn't, and then we'll look at how to configure it with a demo and wrap up with some frequently asked questions. So sources and targets. If you're an existing user of Tungsten Replicator, you'll be aware that it can replicate out of MySQL, and it also can replicate into MySQL, but also a number of heterogeneous targets. So this is the standard features that are available with the main commercial version of Tungsten Replicator. The same applies for the Tungsten TMI. So the TMI itself will allow you to set up a replication pipeline from any of these MySQL sources. So that could be a MySQL instance that you've installed locally on your own bare metal or VMs, and that could be Community Edition, Percona, MariaDB, Enterprise Edition. We can also extract out of Amazon RDS and Amazon Aurora, the MySQL variants, the Google Cloud MySQL, and also Azure. So that can be your source. In terms of your target, we can replicate into all of those, and additionally our heterogeneous targets, which are Oracle, Amazon Redshift, Kafka, PostgreSQL, Vertica, MongoDB and Hadoop. And the TMI that we have available allows you to do this really easily and really quickly. So what is the TMI? You hear me talking about it, but what is it? The TMI is the Tungsten Machine Image, and it's an image that we have built and made available in the AWS and Google marketplaces. It will build a fully functional instance with all of the prerequisites in place, such as the operating system users, the directory structures, and all the prerequisites like Ruby and Java and the client binaries where applicable. It will contain a fully unrestricted version of Tungsten Replicator applicable to the source or target that you subscribe to, and it will run on Rocky Linux. And this is all available right now in those marketplaces. You can choose to subscribe on an hourly basis, or you can pay for an annual subscriptions. But this is just for the software only, so there's no support included. It's just the use of the software for those scenarios that you want to set up. What it isn't, it's not a database. So we don't include any database software. We don't include MySQL or Postgres or any of those variants. That's all for you to provide. Think of it as a bring your own database. We just provide the software that allows you to replicate between those source and target instances. You will obviously need to provision and configure those source and target databases, set them up. There are some prerequisites that you'll need to apply, but we'll come on to that shortly. How do you subscribe? Well, you go to the Amazon or the Google marketplaces, search for Tungsten, and you'll find them all listed there. You will need one subscription for each source that you want to set up, and that one is labeled as the Tungsten Replicator for MySQL source, and that's your extractor. So you will need one of those. And then you will need one subscription for each of the targets that you need. So if you're doing MySQL to Vertica, for example, you will have one subscription to the replicator for MySQL source, and then you'll have one subscription for the replicator for Vertica appliers. So you just pick and choose and mix and match the ones that you need. Before launching, as I mentioned, ensure that any prerequisites are in place for your database instances. So if you're doing MySQL and Oracle, you need to make sure that the operating system users are in place and things like that. All of this is outlined on our prerequisite pages in our doc pages, which are linked up here. There's a page there for the MySQL prereqs, which will talk you through the database users and privileges that you need in your database and any recommended parameters that need setting in MySQL. And then the deployment appliers page, there's a page for each different applier, which will talk about the various different prerequisites that you'll need to have in place in your target database. So for example, having a user account set up ready to go in Vertica, for example. Once you've launched the instance through the marketplace, log in, connect as the Tungsten user, and you will be presented with a launch wizard which will ask you some basic questions and get you started. The questions will build a basic configuration file which will then be used when you do the install, which is the final step of that. Once that's installed, start the replicator and you will have a functional replication pipeline. How do you get help? Well, as I mentioned, there is no support on these images. We do offer support during your 14-day free trial if you've come through Amazon. Google includes support. We have extensive online documentation. So if you go to docs.continuant.com, you will see manuals there for Tungsten Replicator, and you'll also see some manuals for the TMI, which go into detail about the launch wizards and the prerequisites, and also some minimum requirements for your instance sizing. We also have some community support available via our Google forums. But if you really do get stuck and you need our help, reach out to us, support@continuant.com. As I said, you get access to support in the 14-day free trial period that you get with the image through Amazon. If you need support beyond those 14 days, engage with us. We're happy to discuss that with you and set up a contract where you can purchase a support agreement from us directly to go alongside your image usage from either Amazon or Google or wherever you source it from. So let's do a demonstration. I'll show you how to set this up. Okay, for this demonstration, I'm going to just configure a simple MySQL to MySQL pipeline. I've currently got here on the screen, as you can see, DB1 and DB2. This is my source and target database. So these are MySQL databases just running on standalone VMs. I'm doing all of this in AWS as well for the purpose of this demonstration. So on these hosts already, I have MySQL installed, and I've already configured a user called Tungsten, which is the user that I will be configuring for the replicator so that the replicator can extract and apply into these databases. And as you can see, I currently have some databases set up. I just have this HR database, which is what I'm going to use as part of the demonstration. In here, I have some tables, but the tables are all empty. So just do a few selects from here. So all of these tables are set up and configured, ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come out of here and I'm just going to switch to my instances that I've set up. So I've subscribed to the MySQL source replicator TMI and also the MySQL applier. So what I'm going to do first is I just need to get some IP addresses from Amazon. So for my external IP address for the extractor, and I will copy it in here, SSH. I'll set up my SSH key, and it's the Rocky user and the IP address for my extractor. Okay, that's that one logged in. And I'll just do the same for the applier. So SSH, that's Rocky at, and the IP address for my applier. Okay, so it logs you in initially as the Rocky user. So once logged in, you then will start with the extractor. So you want to do these one at a time because some of the questions may be slightly different. So we'll start with the extractor first, sudo su -tungsten. Okay, so the first thing on an installation when you launch it, you're presented with a README, which will just pretty much go through some of the things we've talked about on these slides today, and it'll also give you links to the documentation. So that's just a README. I don't see that on mine because I'm running this on the internal Continuant network, so it just bypasses that for me. So that's the first thing we're going to do then is that the instance is started. It's saying the host name is this, which is the current host name, and it's saying that more than one IP address is configured. So the TMI supports both formats of IP, IPv4 or v6, and we just need to know which one you're going to use for replication because that's important in making sure that we use the right network interface. I'm just going to stick to IPv4 for simplicity because I need to type this IP address maybe a few times. So I'm just going to select number 1 for IPv4. Enter a new host name. So do I want to change the host name? If I just press enter, don't put anything, it will keep the host name as IP-10.2 whatever. I'm just going to change this to ext1, so I'm going to call it the extractor one. Okay, so it sets the host name. So what is the service name we want to create? A service name needs to be unique between source and target. So whatever service name I put here on the extractor, I will also need to use again on the applier. A service name is just a label that you can use to identify what the replication service is. So some customers may use a service name that relates to the part of the network they're in or the region they're in or the application usage, so like warehouse or marketing and things like that. I'm just going to, for simplicity, one that I always use for demonstrations, I'll just use alpha. So would you like to enable SSL security? I'm going to say no for this for simplicity, but by default SSL is enabled. And if I didn't say anything on here, why, the uppercase response is always the default if you don't enter anything. So I'm just going to say no for now. And then we want to know what we're going to set up. Are we configuring for a standalone remote host, standalone local host, RDS, cloud, or Azure? Because each type of source has slightly different configuration requirements. Now I'm going to use the database on DB1, so in my instance it's standalone remote host. If you want a standalone local host, you can do that, but before you log in as the Tungsten and start this wizard, you'd need to connect as the root user and you would need to install MySQL, install the various RPMs to configure MySQL, whether that's Community Edition, Pacona, MariaDB, Enterprise Edition if you have licenses, whichever version you want you can install, but you would need to do that before if you want to install it as a local MySQL instance. So I'm going to say 1 for my remote host. So now it's saying make sure all the prerequisites are in place. Obviously we've talked about the prerequisites, there's a documentation link there as well. But now we need to enter the credentials for the source database. So what is the host name of my remote MySQL host? Well, that was DB1. And it also now needs to know what is my IP address of DB1. Now, because I'm using Amazon, this is going to be the internal IP address for the hosts. Obviously, if it's your own remote host that's not in Amazon, that's somewhere else, it's just going to be the IP address, however you configure it to connect, as long as those network rules are open in AWS and you can connect to it. So just pop the IP address in there. What port is the database running on? Well, the port for my database is actually 13306 because I've been using it for something else, but otherwise it would be the default 3306. What's the database user for the replicator? Well, I've created that Tungsten user. Default is Tungsten, so I don't need to type anything here, just press enter. And what is the password for that user that I've configured? I just type that in. THL port, so the default is 2112, so this is the port that THL is going to be distributed on. Again, it needs to be in your network rules to make sure this port is open between the source and the extractor. RMI port, again, this is the communication port between the two replicators on the extractor and the applier, so make sure that's open between the two. How long do we want to keep THL logs for? The default is 7 days. We can adjust that if you wish. If you increase it, and this is a very busy system, then you need to also bear in mind disk capacity. By default, the AMIs that we launch in Amazon and the ones that we launch in Google, they'll launch with a 40 gig partition. So when you are configuring the instance, when you launch it, if you know that you're going to need more storage for binary logs and THL logs, increase that storage when you configure the host. I'm just going to reduce mine actually to 3 days. How much memory do you want to allocate to the Java process for the replicator? Default is 1024, which is pretty much okay for 95% of the configurations. But if you do want to increase that, you can type in a value here, or you can also configure it afterwards if you feel you need to increase it. I'm just going to leave it as the default. The replicator has the ability to auto recover. If you've watched any of our other training sessions, we have a session that talks about auto recovery. If you want to enable it here, you can. I'm not going to because I just want to keep this simple. But if you want to enable it, you just press Y here and it will just ask you a few more questions about configuring auto recovery. Will this be a heterogeneous pipeline? So if you are configuring MySQL to something other than MySQL, you need to say yes here. If you're doing MySQL to MySQL, say no here. So I'm doing MySQL to MySQL, so it's not heterogeneous. Do I want to enable the replicate filter? So I'm going to say yes to this because I only want to replicate that HR schema. I don't want to replicate everything else in my database. So there's two approaches. I can do replicate.do or replicate.ignore. Again, if you've seen any of our previous training sessions where we talk about filters, this will make more sense. But there are two ways to filter on schemas. I could say replicate.do and then put in the HR schema, and it will only replicate the HR schema. If I did replicate ignore, I would have to list all of the databases I don't want to get the one that I do want. So there's two ways you can do this. You can either replicate.do and it'll only replicate that one, or ignore and it'll replicate everything except the ones that you've listed. So I'm going to do replicate.do because it's simpler, it's only one schema. And I'm just going to put HR. You could do number of, if I had another schema in here, I could do another schema. If there was a table in one particular schema that I wanted to order, you can do table schema.table. It's just a comma separated list of everything that you want to replicate. I'm just going to do HR. Please enter the database user for the API. So this version of Tungsten has the API available, but it needs credentials setting up for it. Default is the Tungsten user. I'm just going to leave that as default. And then I'm going to create a password for that user. Passwords don't match. I need to type it in more carefully. There we go. And that's it. So that's the configuration of the extractor is complete. What that's actually done is built the Tungsten INI file. The first thing that the wizard's asking me now, would you like the wizard to start the installation for you? I'm just going to say no. If I had said yes, it would have actually changed directory to this directory here, and it would have run tools tpm install. I just want to show you a few more things before I do the installation. So as I mentioned, the installation has basically built the Tungsten INI file made up of all of the responses that you provided in that wizard. If there are other properties that you are aware, if you've used Tungsten Replicator before and you know there are other properties that you want to enable on your extractor, you can just edit this file now and set them up, or you can edit this file afterwards if you want to change them. The wizard just asks you the basics to give you a starting point and a template, but then there's more you can add to this in your own free time just by opening up the documentation, working out what you want to add in and going on from there. So that one is set up. Let's just set up the applier before we actually go ahead and do the install. So same thing, log in as Tungsten. Asks you again the IP address, so I'm going to stick to IPv4, and I'm going to put my host name here as applier1. Next, the service name, so again alpha, so the service name here needs to match the service name I used on the extractor. SSL no. Am I configuring this as a cluster extractor? This question is if you are currently running Tungsten clustering and you want to use the AMI to replicate from your cluster to a standalone instance. In this scenario, obviously I'm going to say no because I'm not doing that. But if you were to be in that position where you are using Tungsten clustering and you want to use the replicator, you don't need the source AMI, you only need the target image to do this, and then you would just say yes at that point. It will ask you some questions about your cluster, like the hosts for the cluster, the service name for the cluster, things like that, and it will set that up for you. But I'm going to say no because we're just doing a straightforward replication. So what's the name of the extractor host? So I called it ext1, and what is the IP that we're using? And it's 10.2.3.170. So if I had chosen to use IPv6 at the beginning, then I would need to be putting the IPv6 in here. So the IP address here is related to the interface that you've configured on that extractor. The THL port, well, we left it as 2112 on the extractor, so we leave it as 2112 here. Is the source a managed MySQL instance? So are you replicating out of Aurora or Google Cloud or something like that? We're not, we're coming from a standalone MySQL instance. But this is important to say yes if you are, because there are different ways to handle replication coming in from those instances. And then what are we writing out to? So are we going out to a remote host, a local host? Again, if you're doing a local host, you need to install MySQL or whatever your target database is before you do this. Are we replicating to Amazon, RDS, Aurora, Google Cloud, Azure, or are we even replicating into another MySQL Tungsten cluster? So you just select the one that's appropriate to you. So we're doing a remote host. The host name is DB2. And what is the internal IP address of DB2? So I'm just going to grab that from my AWS dashboard, pop that in there. The database port, so the database on my target is also running on 13306. Database user, Tungsten, pop in the password there. What THL port do I want to set? So depending upon the configuration you want to do, if you've set a different THL port at the extractor, you would put that in here, but then you can have a different THL port here for your applier so you can broadcast. It's more advanced configurations, but for a simple, straightforward one-to-one replicator, just leave that as default. Same with the RMI port, default. THL, do we want to change the THL, leave it as default? I'm going to put mine to 3 because we reduced it to 3 on the extractor. Again, same memory for the Java process. Auto recovery, same questions will come again now. And also the filtering. So I've got the filter enabled on the extractor, so I don't need to enable the filter on the applier. I could choose to either filter on extraction or filter on apply. It's up to you. In this particular instance, if you're potentially crossing network boundaries and you want to filter on a schema, it would be probably better to filter on extraction because it will reduce the size of the THL files that are then being shipped across the network. It would just be a bit more efficient. It depends on your configuration and how you're using that data and how you want to replicate that data around. So I'm filtering on extraction, so I'll just say no to enabling the filter here. API user, pop that in. Again, I'll say no there. So again, that's now configured the INI file for me. And say once again, if you wanted to make more changes to that, you can do. So we're now ready to actually do the installation. So I'm just going to go out of here, make sure the host name has been set, and I'll run it on both hosts at the same time. So Tungsten Opt Continuous Software, Tungsten Replicator. And from here, I'll just do tools tpm install. And then we'll just wait a moment for the installation to finish. Okay, the extractor almost finished, the applier is finished. We've got a warning there about THL retention, 3 days. It's saying we've set it less than the binary log expiry policy, which is 7 days. It's only a warning, but it is a warning because if we lose THL, we can recreate binary logs, but ideally your binary log and THL log retention really wants to be the same. But that's just a warning, not to worry about that. The SSL certificate comment is primarily, we haven't enabled security, so we don't need to worry about that. We have set up the API user, but we've set the same password for the API user on both the source and the target, so we don't need to worry about that. If we had enabled security at this point, we would need to synchronize those keys between the hosts, either synchronize from the extractor to the applier so they're the same between the two, or from the applier to the extractor. As long as they're the same between all hosts within a replication pipeline, it doesn't matter whether you choose the source or the target ones for that, but you need to set them up. If we'd chosen to enable security, the wizard would have given you all of this information on the extra steps that you need to take. So Replicator is installed. So I'm just going to exit over here and log back in again to reload the environment. So it would have set up the paths and aliases and things like that. And I can now simply just do a start all, keep my fingers crossed and hope that the replicator starts up okay. Okay, so it says replicator service is started. So now I can do the trepctl status. And there we go. We have a running replicator on the source, the binary position we're currently at. The source DB, DB1, we are ext1. It's configured, it's online. And then on the applier, DB2 we're writing into, we are app1. We're connected to ext1 on port 2112 to get the THL that is generated. And yeah, we're ready to go. So what I can do now is if I go to my database over here, and let's go into MySQL. I'm just going to do this on one host. And let's just put some data in. So I'm just going to grab some inserts. Let's see what that row is in regions. I don't want to duplicate data. There's nothing in regions. So let's just put some data in here. I'm just going to copy. I've just got to add on the side here. So let's pop all that data in. And then what we should be able to do is go over here. Oops. And we can see that data is there. Let's look at what was in countries. Okay, and then just to prove that that is all going through, let's just truncate all those tables. And let's do those selects again. Table's empty, so we know replication is working. And if we looked at our replicators over here, we can see that sequence numbers have incremented. So on the extractor, sequence number 14, sequence number 14, we can see that the data is moving through. And that's it. It's very simple, straightforward. We've set up a replicator pipeline. We've used the AMI or whatever the image source is for Google. It's configured, it's running. You've not had to worry about setting up prerequisites or anything. Answered a few questions and you have a fully functional replication pipeline. So let me switch back to my slides. Okay, I hope you found that useful. Just before we wrap up, let's just go through some frequently asked questions. These are questions that we often get asked from users in the past, so I thought I'd put them here just to give you some background information. So can you extract from other types of databases such as Oracle and Postgres? At the moment, no. We only extract from MySQL. Obviously, we can apply into all of those, but extraction is purely MySQL. Can I install the replicator on your existing database hardware? With the TMI, no. It can only be installed on the instances that you launch via the marketplaces. However, if this is something you want to explore, reach out to us and we can engage with you in conversation about a subscription to the commercial release of the software, which you would be contracted to us directly with. And from there, you can then install it on your existing hardware if you wish. Can you install the applier and extractor on the same host? Again, the same as the previous question, not with the TMI, but with a subscription to that commercial release you can. And a subscription to the commercial release would also include the support as well. It would include upgrades throughout the lifetime of your subscription. There would be a few more advanced topologies that you would be able to achieve with the commercial subscription as well, which wouldn't necessarily be as easy to achieve with the TMI. Finally, filters. Can you create your own? Absolutely. There's a doc page link there which will explain how to do it. In the demo, I only showed you the replicate filter. Very simple, very basic filter. There are lots more filters available. Review the documentation. You'll see them all there. If there isn't a filter there that achieves what you want to achieve, then by all means, you can create your own. Very straightforward if you have the skills in-house with writing JavaScript. So what have we learned today? Well, we reviewed the sources and targets available for the TMI. We learned what the TMI actually is and isn't in some cases. We also talked about how to configure the TMI, and I gave a demonstration on doing that. So thank you for listening. I hope you found this session useful. If you do have any questions, please do reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help. In the meantime, take care, and I look forward to speaking to you on another training session very soon. Thank you and goodbye. Okay, I hope you found that useful. Just before we wrap up, let's just go through some frequently asked questions. These are questions that we often get asked from users in the past, so I thought I'd put them here just to give you some background information. So can you extract from other types of databases such as Oracle and Postgres? At the moment, no, we only extract from MySQL. Obviously, we can apply into all of those, but extraction is purely MySQL. Can I install the replicator on your existing database hardware? With the TMI, no. It can only be installed on the instances that you launch via the marketplaces. However, if this is something you want to explore, reach out to us and we can engage with you in conversation about a subscription to the commercial release of the software, which you would be contracted to us directly with. And from there, you can then install it on your existing hardware if you wish. Can you install the applier and extractor on the same host? Again, the same as the previous question, not with the TMI, but with a subscription to that commercial release you can. And a subscription to the commercial release would also include the support as well. It would include upgrades throughout the lifetime of your subscription. There would be a few more advanced topologies that you would be able to achieve with the commercial subscription as well, which wouldn't necessarily be as easy to achieve with the TMI. Finally, filters. Can you create your own? Absolutely. There's a doc page link there which will explain how to do it. In the demo, I only showed you the replicate filter. Very simple, very basic filter. There are lots more filters available. Review the documentation. You'll see them all there. If there isn't a filter there that achieves what you want to achieve, then by all means, you can create your own. Very straightforward if you have the skills in-house with writing JavaScript. So what have we learned today? Well, we reviewed the sources and targets available for the TMI. We learned what the TMI actually is and isn't in some cases. We also talked about how to configure the TMI, and I gave a demonstration on doing that. So thank you for listening. I hope you found this session useful. If you do have any questions, please do reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to help. In the meantime, take care, and I look forward to speaking to you on another training session very soon. Thank you and goodbye.